spending time with her husband, friends, family, including her 12 grandchildren. In her spare time, she connects and celebrates with the women involved in motorsports, taking you behind the wall about their journey of life, racing, and how they juggle everything to make it all work. Welcome to Racing Girls Rock Podcast. Strap in, window nets up, the pedals are down, and when the green flag drops, we go.
Hello, everyone. This is Melinda Russell with Racing Girls Rock Podcast. And I am very honored today to have a fellow podcaster with me. I listen to this gal every week. She's been involved in NASCAR motorsports for quite some time, but we're going to kind of hear her story and hear how did she get interested in motorsports and how did she end up becoming a writer. So my guest today is Kelly Crandall. Kelly's been on the NASCAR beat full-time since 2013, and she joined Racer as the chief NASCAR writer in 2017. Her work has also appeared in NASCAR.com, the NASCAR Illustrated magazine, and NBC Sports. A corporate communications graduate from Central Penn College, Kelly is a two-time George Cunningham Writer of the Year recipient from the National Motorsports Press Association. That's pretty impressive. She also is the publisher, author, however you want to put it, of the Racing Writers podcast, which you can find on any major platform. She's everywhere that you can find podcasts. And that podcast, she interviews all kinds of people involved in the motorsports industry, drivers, crew chiefs, personalities from the garage. So if you haven't listened to her podcast, you need to find it and you need to start listening because it's one of the really good ones. So Kelly, welcome to the show.
My goodness, what an introduction. Thank you very much. That also sounds way better than when I do my intros on my podcast. So I might have to hire you and bring you on to do all of my intros for my episode. That was fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So Kelly, I've listened to you for a while, like I said, and been wanting to have you on for a while, and we just have to get our schedules coordinated. So let's start first with, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, you know, whatever you're comfortable with, where you live, your family, your pets, that kind of thing, and like maybe where you grew up. And then from there, I'd like you to start with, how did you get interested and involved in motorsports?
Oh my goodness. Well, I am originally from New Jersey, born and raised in central New Jersey, which is a thing, by the way. I know that apparently on the internet these days, there's a debate whether there's a such thing as central New Jersey. So let me just say there is central New Jersey. Born and raised there, and I moved to North Carolina in the summer of 2014. So I've been down here now quite a while, just outside of Charlotte. And yeah, I'm either working or I'm reading. So I love to read. I love sports. So I'm very happy that football is back. College football is back. Mm-hmm. Baseball, but nothing really to talk there because the Yankees haven't been doing so well. But yeah, I just all around sports and a little bit of reality TV. But like I said, a lot of racing and reading books when I can. I live with my boyfriend. We've got two dogs who are not here currently, so thankfully they won't be barking in the background during this. They are with my parents, but one of them is named Daytona after the racetrack, of course. Just I have a very unique, and maybe not unique, but a special connection to that racetrack. So when I got my first dog, she's mine. I've had her since she was just a little pup. That was just the natural name to go with. So, but like I said, they're not here, but love them to death. They keep me on my toes. And yeah, I mean, very, like I said, very simple: sports, books, and racing. That's basically everything that I have going on. So I don't go out much. If I'm not working and if I'm not at the racetrack, I'm sitting around being lazy. So, and then how I got into racing, my goodness, it's, you know, the simple answer is everybody watches the Daytona 500. the biggest race of the season. Even if you're a casual fan, I think the Daytona 500 probably draws you in. You know about it, you've heard about it. It's the biggest race of the year. So when I was younger, I think I would have been 11. My dad was watching the 2001 Daytona 500. He was a casual fan at that point. It wasn't something that he watched every week. He had been a race fan when he was younger. Rusty Wallace in the Miller Lite car, or the Genuine Draft car, and Richard Petty, and he knew Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon. But by the time he got married and kids came along, like I said, I was already 11. He was just more of a casual race fan, but he watched the Daytona 500 for the exact reasons that I just said. So he was watching that day. I was not watching. I wasn't paying attention, but naturally after Dale Earnhardt Sr. died, that was all anybody talked about. So my dad and one of our close family friends, who was also a race fan, that is all they talked about for months. And they kept talking about, we need to make sure we watch the July race at Daytona. When they go back to Daytona, it'll be the first race there since Dale Sr. had died. And they even talked about maybe we should try to get tickets and go down there. So I just kept hearing about this race, and I just kept hearing about NASCAR. So they didn't end up going to the race, of course, but I had heard about it so much that when that race came around, I sat down and watched it. And I tell people that as far as I can remember, I did not move from in front of the TV all night. And that was absolutely, legitimately all it took was that race. I was completely hooked from the speed and the sound and the sparks under the lights, and just obviously the storyline of that race, and the rest is history. Hand across my heart, that the rest is history. That was all it took.
Well, isn't that kind of the truth about how many of us became fans of NASCAR? It maybe took watching that one race with your dad on TV. Maybe it was your first actual visit to a racetrack with a family member, or maybe, whatever it was. Sometimes it's just that one experience, and it just reaches in and grabs you almost, doesn't it? To where you're hooked and you have to watch the next race and then the next race, and then we're hooked for life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I tell people all the time that watching on TV is great, but you need to come experience it in person. You need to appreciate the speed and the sound and the smells. The very cliche, you have to let it hit your senses.
Yeah.
And you can't do that through television. And unfortunately, with television, you're only watching what they show you. So if you come to the racetrack, you can experience it yourself. You can see the entire race. You can see. So I tell people the same thing. It's great to watch on TV, and I'd love to say go to YouTube and look at this clip and look at that clip, but until you come to a racetrack and get that first person experience, I think you'll understand it and appreciate it a little bit better.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just like watching football on TV or going to the game. You have to smell the hot dogs, and as far as NASCAR, you have to hear the roar of the engines. You have to smell the fuel in the air. And it's just the whole atmosphere and the crowd and everything. You can't explain it to anybody. They absolutely have to come and experience it for themselves. And I know that once they do, we have more fans. I took my granddaughter and her boyfriend to Texas to the race. They live in Texas, and neither one had been to a NASCAR race. And my granddaughter's father had raced, so she had been around it a little bit, but her boyfriend had never really been interested in racing at all. And we were sitting there, it was 100 degrees that day. It was miserable. But the questions, he had all kinds of questions. Well, why are they doing that? Why is he pitting and nobody else? And all these different questions. And he said, I had no idea what it was like. And so now I've got 2 more fans, and that's really all it takes. And I love exposing people to a live race, even if it's a short track, even if it's Kalamazoo Speedway, just getting them there one time and they're hooked for sure.
Again, absolutely. I mean, nothing beats being able to feel it and see it and smell it. And then just if you get to interact with drivers or you get to interact with other fans and just that whatever access you have, you're not going to get that same experience on television.
No, absolutely not. It's interesting. I also am a big fan of the Dale Jr. Download. And he was talking last night on his podcast about how his view of racing has changed since he's been in the broadcast booth. And even, he raced the Xfinity race a couple weeks ago, and he tangled with a couple different guys and he interviewed them on his show. And he said, it's made me a better announcer because I was back at like 15th or whatever, and we don't see those cars on TV very often. And so, you see the leaders and you see when the wreck happens. But when you're at the racetrack, maybe you've picked out car number 27 and he's really not anybody that anybody's heard of, but you like the look of the car. And so you're going to follow him around that track as he goes around. And it just makes it more interesting that you can see everything that's going on, not rely on just what the TV is going to show us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always been my biggest, I wouldn't say complaint, but my biggest argument is that if you go to the racetrack, you see a lot more. You're not handcuffed by what television wants to present to you.
Right. And, the thing about that too, and I always feel bad for those drivers who have worked hard to get those sponsors, because we know how difficult that is. I don't care if you're the number 1 driver like Kyle Larson or you're the number 40 driver. It's just as hard. And really it's more difficult if you're not winning races and you're not on TV very much. So getting those sponsors is difficult, and they deserve some TV time. They deserve some mention and some show. And so I feel the same way. I feel like they need to show a little more of the whole experience and not just the lead cars or the first 10 cars or whatever it might be. But we're probably not going to change that, Kelly. I think that's way above our pay grade. So anyway, we'll have to just go to the track like we do and enjoy it and encourage other people to do the same.
Yeah. Again, that's all you can do is just go to the track, and then you can see what you want to see and focus on what you want to watch.
Right. So you are a reader and a writer, very much right up my wheelhouse as well. I love to read. I love to write. And so tell me, like, what would be some of your favorite interviews that you've done, either through the through racer.com or some of your other stories, or maybe even on your podcast? Have you got a few that maybe you would say were really your favorites, or an unexpected surprise good interview that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I get asked this every so often, and I keep telling myself I need to sit down and come up with a list so I have an answer, and I have yet to do that because they all run together after a while. But I will say with the podcast, what surprises me, I think, with the podcast is how open people have been. And maybe they're not, but to me it feels like they're pretty open and they're pretty engaging. So that always surprises me, that they feel comfortable enough to do that. If we can laugh about whatever, I take great pride in that, because it shows that they're comfortable, they're having fun. Chris Gale is an upcoming guest on the podcast. I've already recorded it, and we had so much fun. And I was just not expecting that, because I have interacted and done things with Chris before. And he's a great guy, but I don't know if I was just thinking, okay, he's going to be crew chief mode and we're just going to have a straightforward conversation. But we laughed the entire time. He was telling great stories about how he got to NASCAR and things he's experienced. And we got off on such a good foot because we were laughing before we were even recording, because we were bonding over the fact that we both cover up the cameras on our laptops because we're paranoid like that for some reason. So between that and how honest he was about when he was moved from the Cup Series to the Xfinity Series at Joe Gibbs Racing, which frankly was not his plan, that was not up to him. The fact that he was so open about, I took that as, okay, I'm going to go whip everybody's asses then. My car and my drivers, I'm going to go try to win every race and prove to people that, okay, you put me here, well, now I'm going to make everybody else's life miserable. Yeah. So interviews like that stand out on the podcast. You know, Jimmy Johnson was a really good one because I appreciated the fact that one of the questions stumped him and he said he'd never been asked that before. And Jimmy Johnson's been racing for how many years, right? 15, 20 some odd years. So I took a lot of pride in that. Written stories, I mean, there's been so many. One of the ones recently, and it's from actually NHRA, was just to be able to sit down with Alexis DeJoria of the Toyota camp and how open she was about the end of her marriage and how she had to step away from racing to try to save her marriage and what her family was going through. The fact that she, again, opened up and put her trust in me to tell that story meant a lot. I sat down years ago with Joey Logano and we recapped. At that point, he was getting ready to make his 300th start in the Cup Series, which was a milestone, it's a big number. So I wanted to do a story on just start 1 to start 300. And, you know, him going through these moments in his career of hearing he's going to lose his job at Joe Gibbs Racing and everybody saying he should lose his job. And, oh my gosh, what am I going to do next? So going through stuff like that has been great. I mentioned Jimmy, but doing a one-on-one with Jimmy in his motorhome and being able to really dig into his psyche of what it was like those last couple of years when that team was just terrible. To be a 7-time champion and win 80-something races and be a consistent top 5 driver, to all of a sudden you're struggling to make the playoffs. Right. To sit down with him for 20, 25 minutes and get an idea of how dark it was, you know, in his mind when that was happening. So there's definitely ones that stand out. So I do need to sit down though and start putting a list together because I'm sure I'm missing a bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know what you mean about things start to run together. You know, I've not written near as many stories as you have because I've only done my magazine since 2017, but I've written 350 some stories. And I had to finally put all their names and stuff in Excel because it was like, now, did I do a story on her or not? I can't remember. And it was like, oh, I feel bad that I can't remember, but they do kind of start to run together, and the podcast the same way, you know, but don't you find that when people are open with you and share things that you weren't expecting, it makes not only a great story or a great podcast, but it makes the person more relatable? Because as we were talking right before we got on, we all have stuff, don't we? We all have things we go through, and drivers are no different. They're people just like us, and crew chiefs and all those people. And so, you know, it makes them more relatable and it makes them seem more human in some ways, because don't we put them on a pedestal at times?
Yeah, I think for me, certainly with the podcast, it makes it easier to tell those stories because with the podcast, I don't want to talk about what happened Saturday night at Daytona. I don't want to talk about what happened Sunday afternoon at Las Vegas. It's not about what happened on the racetrack. The podcast for me is a way to talk about how you got here, what your story is that people may not know, or to talk about, again, get inside your head, what's going on, what does this feel like, and tell those stories again that has nothing to do with right here and right now. I try to do that too with feature stories. And it's funny because I was just having a conversation with one of my editors this week about that, of I feel like I've gotten away from that recently. It was almost like the pandemic hit and all the access went away. And so you're not really spending time with people. You're not really observing. I'm not doing those feature type stories that I normally like to do, but I love to tell those stories.
Yeah.
Again, my job, yes, is to report news, and my job is to go to the racetrack and tell you what happened in the race. But I enjoy, again, telling stories and getting to spend time with someone of how did this feel, or again, what do you have going on in your life? If they're at the simulator, just telling stories that don't have to do with running 500 miles at Las Vegas. So and it makes them more relatable, because again, you're not just talking about what happened on the racetrack. Everybody saw what happened on the racetrack. So it does. It's fun to tell those stories and for me to get to know the drivers, the crew chiefs, whoever it may be. But I also think it helps readers and it helps fans just better understand these are normal everyday people that have jobs to do, and sometimes that job is really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't even the fact that 500 laps on a hot day is really hard on your body and all kinds of things, but there's a lot of things they go through that the normal, you and I don't go through. I can walk down the pit lane area and I'm not being surrounded and wanted autographs, right? But they can't really go anywhere without somebody wanting something from them. And I know they get a lot of crap sometimes about the way they act, but put yourself in those shoes. It would get old. It would really get old. But guess what? That's part of their job. They know that. And so they typically, are very gracious about autographs and pictures and whatever, but you can understand why sometimes they're not, because it would get old. It'd be like, I just want to go get a drink. I didn't want to sign 10 autographs.
I think you take it you take it on a case by case basis, but there's a time and a place for everything. I don't know if I would want to disturb someone as they're about to climb in the race car, and drivers say the same thing. There's a good time to really try to get that interaction with them. But that's a separate conversation. That's a case by case basis.
Yeah, that's true. So Kelly, what's your favorite thing about your job, about what you do?
That's a good question. I think it's just being able to tell stories. Obviously I love racing. I love watching what happens, and the fact that I can walk, into a garage area and reach out and touch a race car. That's so cool. The fact that I can obviously interact with a Denny Hamlin and a Kyle Busch and a Joey Logano. But to me, it's the stories. It's trying to come up with story ideas. I've been doing that here recently, as I just said, trying to come up with and get back to telling feature stories of, okay, what's going on? What, who haven't I done something with? Who has something going on? I think that's what it is for me, is because every day is different, right? I don't wake up and be like, okay, well, today I'm going to do this, this, and this. No, today I'm going to wake up and, okay, what do I need to do for the podcast? Is there a podcast that needs editing? Is there a conversation that I can schedule with someone? Then it's thinking of all those questions. Is there a media availability today? Literally every day is different.
Right.
And every week is different, and every race brings a new storyline. So I think for me, it's just what stories need to be told.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of what we do, because I do a lot of things very similar to what you do, is that you never know when you get up what the news is going to tell us, or what's happened overnight, or, after like the weekend, there was all the controversy at the race, and there's just so many storylines that you can find if you're looking. And it's not the same as going to a job every day that is pretty repetitive. Our jobs every day are different. And today I get to talk to you, and in a couple of days I'm going to talk to another young woman. And it's a pleasure and a joy to meet all of you, because then I feel like, hey, Kelly's my friend. I've met her. I've talked to her. I know who she is. I know about her. I know she has a dog named Daytona, and these kind of things. And then when we do meet for the first time at a race one of these days, then it'll be like we've already met in some ways and we've already become friends. And that's the part I love about what I do is, yes, telling the stories. That's why I started the magazine. That's why I do the podcast. And then making friends. You know, I usually say if the podcast goes away, the magazine goes away, I'm still going to know Kelly Crandall and I'm still going to have her as my friend, and nobody can take that away from me.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wonderful community. You listen, I've gotten to know many people through social media, even before I became a writer. You know, I was using social media to network, but just meet other fans. And now there's people that even as I'm a writer that I still know because we were fans together, and, you know, they'll reach out to me and they'll say how cool it is to follow now what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Or, you know, get to work alongside people that I followed for the longest time. And it's the same thing with fans, is go to races, because I would do the same thing with my dad. You know, my dad and I would go to races and just meet other fans and just bond over racing and what you saw that day. And you want to talk about what's going on the racetrack. So it's a great community. And like anything, I mean, it is what you make it. So it sounds cliche, but if you want to come here and make fans or make friends, you can certainly do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. So Kelly, is there anybody on your list that you would like to interview or write a story about that you haven't done yet, or you haven't had the opportunity? Is there somebody that's your burning story?
No, not really. I mean, I keep a list of guests I would like to get for the podcast. And it's just a matter of asking. I mean, they're either going to say yes or no. I don't, whether it's the podcast or whether it's a story, I don't really have like, you know, I don't really have that white whale out there. Yeah. But I do keep lists. I'm a big list person in general. I have to write everything down.
Me too.
I don't know why, but the older I have gotten, the easier it is for me to forget things. And if I don't see it in front of me, then I either A, won't remember to do it, or I won't feel, I just won't have the energy to do it. So I have to write everything down so it stares me in the face. So I keep lists of podcast guests and who I would like to have, when, you know, if I'm getting someone scheduled, if I need to send a request. And then with stories, I keep a notebook of just story idea and how I would do it. And, you know, so that way I can either sit on it for a little while and think about it, or, you know, kind of flesh it out a little bit and then approach whoever it is and say, okay, here's my idea. Here's what I'm thinking. So I have ideas for stories and podcasts. I've learned not to tell people about them because, you know, you want to keep it close to the vest so you don't give away your best ideas and things of that. But I do keep lists. And but to your original question, I don't really have like that big, you know, that big must have or goal or I guess so. Not.
I'm a list maker as well. I always have been. And yes, I have a smartphone and I do put appointments and keep track of things in there, but I also have it's called Happy Planner. It's a paper planner. I can't get away from it. I was a scrapbooker. I love paper. I love colored pens and all that kind of goofy stuff. And I'll just tell you, Kelly, you're half my age or less, you know, or more than half my age. And it's even more important as you get older to have those lists. So don't stop.
Yeah.
That's a good habit.
I've been telling people that I should probably have stock in Post-it notes because like I said, in Post-it notes, and I love journals because again, I can just keep story ideas in journals.
Yeah.
I do journal also, but that's not what we're talking about. But I love notebooks, journals.
Yeah.
I use legal pads for the podcast, and just stick it. Yeah. I've just notes everywhere.
You're a paper person just like I am. We have a lot in common other than like I said, you're way younger than I am, but you're still have that inside you, the writing piece, the reading piece. That's your passion, and it comes out in your stories and in your interviews because you can hear it. I can hear it when I hear you interview somebody. I know that you're enjoying what you're doing. And so that makes the podcast and the story all that much better. It's not just a job to you, it's your passion.
Yeah. And again, with the podcast, you can't fake it because people are hearing it. It's audio. So for me, it's really cool that whether it's you or anyone that sends me messages and says either how good the conversation was or how much you could tell I enjoyed it or the guest enjoyed it, because again, you're hearing it right from someone. And that's why I'm a fan of podcasts myself. I became a fan of a podcast. I mean, I didn't become a big fan of podcasts until about 2016. Like, I knew they existed, but I had never really dug into any podcast myself. I got into podcasts in 2016 because I was working for NBC, and a lot of what I was doing was sitting on my computer all day and overseeing the website. And, it's not like I was just laying around, like I had to be logged in. So when I was logged in for 8 hours a day, I was like, okay, what can I do while I sit here? So I got into podcasts, and that's why I love podcasts, is because you can hear from the person. Right. It's their words directly from them. It's hopefully not edited, it's exactly as they say it. You can hear their emotion, you can hear the context. So I keep that in mind when I do my podcast, that they're going to be able to tell whether you're enjoying it or whether you think somebody's lying or trying to fake it. So I appreciate you saying that, because I do think that's one of the great things about the podcast, is whether it's me or whether it's the guest, I think we've been all pretty genuine in the conversations.
I think absolutely. So maybe my final question, and then I'll let you have a chance if there's anything else you want to share, is when Kelly's all done and done with her career and moves on to whatever it is you're going to do when you're my age or whatever, what do you want to be best remembered for?
Oh my gosh. I haven't thought about that yet, Melinda. That's
well, you're young, that's why.
Yeah, that's way off, right?
It is way off, but you're heading that way. You're heading that way.
The only times I have thought about that is in my moments of self-pity, when I have felt like I am at the end of my like I'm not gonna be able to do this anymore because the money's gonna run out or I'm gonna have to give it up. That's the only time I've ever thought about that. But it's mostly been when I'm having a nervous breakdown and crying on the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like anyone, first of all, hopefully people thought you're a nice person. Obviously. And I know we all struggle with that sometimes, but if people would just say, at heart, she was a good person, that would mean a lot. When it comes to the profession, just that I was fair, that I was respectful to everyone that I came across, hopefully, and that I wrote well and that I wrote interesting stories. So that's that would be all I could ask for, is that, again, people thought I was just a good person, that I was, nice at heart and had everybody's best interest and was just respectful and fair and wrote a decent story along the way.
Yeah. Well, those are pretty good things to strive for and be. And, I think you're well on your way to all of those. So I don't think you have anything to worry about. And, I love listening to your podcast. Every week it's different and it's interesting and it's always timely. That's the thing that I enjoy about it. There are timely interviews about, what's happening now. And so I love that part. Is there anything that I haven't talked to you about that you'd like to share, or and then
Not that I can think of. I mean, going back to what we were just talking about of, you want people to just respect you or think that you're a good person. I will say that I think sometimes, and this is just a random side comment, is just, I think, I hope I don't come off, I think with social media, I worry about coming off harsh or coming off rude on social media, because right, like, people don't know how to take, you're reading it in print, you don't know how to take it. So that's just a weird random side comment, but you had me thinking about how you want people to remember you. And I always worry, because I'm like, well, I live in the era of social media, so I hope I'm not being judged by social media.
well, we all live in that, and it's always true that how I write the words may not be how you interpret what I've said.
Yeah.
And that's true of every one of us that uses social media.
And humor does not come through on social media.
No.
There are times where I'm trying to be funny. And now, granted, I'm not a very funny person anyway, but there's times where I think I'm like, okay, I nailed that one. And it doesn't come through on social media. So that's just my random side comment for the day, is I hope I'm not being judged by what people see on social media.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So Kelly, tell us, for the people who haven't followed you or who would like to know more about, how can they read what your written stories? How can they listen to you? Where would they find you?
Yeah. Well, obviously racer.com is the #1 place. So NASCAR is my primary job, but I will say Racer has been fantastic in letting me dabble and do some more NHRA stuff. So every so often you might see an NHRA piece from me, but a lot of NASCAR. I am the only NASCAR writer over there. I mean, obviously we have some contributing things from Eric Johnson, I believe, is from Monster. So he's always got some interesting Kurt Busch or Ricky Stenhouse stuff, but it's me over there. So racer.com for NASCAR and maybe some NHRA stuff. The podcast, the Racing Writers podcast, as you said, I believe is now, it should be every major platform. I haven't checked recently, but I do know it's on Apple, Google, Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it's on iHeartRadio. I haven't seen it for myself, but it should be on all major platforms. And of course, I put it on social media. And social media is very easy to find me. I got very lucky. My full name is everywhere. So I got lucky with that on my Twitter handle. It's just @KellyCrandall. Same thing on Instagram. The only note that I tell people is that you can find me on Facebook, but make sure you're looking, there's a public figure page, I guess you would say, or so that's where I've set that up. So it's just racer links, it's podcast links. If you try to find me on my personal page, I think, as you found out, Melinda, because I didn't see the message for the longest time. I don't go over there on my personal one. So make sure, if you want to keep up with my work, you're following the public page where all the links are. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it.
Well, they should be able to find you anywhere that they look on social media, because you're pretty easy to find. And after I sent you the message on your private page, then I realized you had a public page. So anyway, that's how it works. But Kelly, I have so enjoyed talking with you today. You're a lovely spirit. You love NASCAR, you love racing. It comes through in the smile on your face, which I know they can't see through the audio, but I can see it. Your stories are amazing. Your interviews are as well. And I have really loved following you, and now today getting to know you a little bit better. So hopefully I'll see you at the racetrack. I'm hoping that we get our hard cards back next year so that we can get back to where we need to be to do the stories that we need to tell. And so that's my hope. Otherwise, I'll be in Phoenix in the grandstand watching for the weekend, because I'll be back in Arizona by then. So
yeah, well, if I make it out to Phoenix, that one's still up in the air for me, but if I make it out there, I will certainly let you know.
Okay.
Would love to see you at the racetrack, and thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, for reading. I mean, honestly, I see your name pop up, so I appreciate the consistent support. So, and I appreciate you wanting to talk to me. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did as well.
I did very much. So you have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you at the racetrack.
Sounds good. Thank you.
We couldn't produce this podcast without our many sponsors. So at this time, let's take a listen to one of our amazing partners.
Have you ever received a card from me? Well, this is why I send cards. Cards are like a vehicle that carry a piece of you into the heart of another person. Upon its arrival, it releases a shot of dopamine into the brain, which puts a smile on the receiver's heart. It's a tool that allows me to stand out in the crowd and be remembered and be liked for being a nice person. I do not send the card with the expectation of anything in return. However, it's a natural human reaction for certain people to say thank you. They don't always say thank you, and that's okay. But I do get thank yous for cards sent years ago when I see the people in person. They tell me they've been waiting to thank me for years and that they still have their card hanging up and they smile every time they see it. This is why I send cards, and using send out cards is the best tool on the planet. To learn more, contact Melinda at iwmanation@gmail.com and send your first card for free.
Thank you for listening to Racing Girls Rock Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at International Women's Motorsports Association or on Instagram and Twitter at the IWMA Nation. And if you know someone that should be on our show, drop us an email at iwmanation@gmail.com.